Hey guys, special video today, how to paint gemstones. So I've received many requests from you guys to show you how to do gemstones. Now in general, what we're trying to accomplish, no matter what color we're painting the gemstone, is going to be the exact same thing. There's a couple of things that we will be first observing using pictures of actual real stuff. I'm going to show you beads of water in my shower. Then we're going to move on to paint one much larger gemstones. I'm going to exaggerate stuff on that one just to get the point across. And then we're going to move on painting much tinier gemstones that are used on typhus. Hang on, here we go. Okay, so first let's look at a bead of water on a wall. Now this is a picture taken from my shower wall. There's a couple of interesting things. So we're going to look at the drop of water that is in the red square. So if you look closely at that drop of water, basically what we're seeing is a gradient from a somewhat middle tone gray to an almost full bright right at the bottom of it. Now, you also see some white dots at the upper part in the grayer zone. Now, these white dots are actually reflected from the lights that there are close to my showers. Now, under it, there's an almost black area, or very, very dark gray. This is essentially shadow casted by water. So yeah, transparent water actually casts a shadow, which is actually pretty interesting. Now, that gradient is what we're going to try to achieve on a gemstone effect. Now, note that the middle tone gray is present for most of the drop of water. As you get towards the middle, it gets slightly brighter, but it really is once you've passed the middle part towards the bottom of the drop of water that it becomes much brighter. All right, so this is what we're going to try to replicate. Now, in order to replicate this, we're going to have to use a specific color palette. Now, we're going to go for a purple gemstone. We're going to use a simple color palette. So if you've seen me do this in the past, you probably see me use a lot more colors than this. But right now we're only going to use black, purple, and ivory. And we're going to mix all of these together in getting the color that we are looking for. Now, more precisely, as I am moving forward in this, the colors that I'm going to be using is first a mix of black and purple with a lot more black. This is currently identified as number 1 on the picture. And then we're going to move towards number 2, number 3, 4, and 5. So number 1, 2, 3, and 4 are all purples that have had some black added to them. Now, obviously 4 has a lot less black than what number 1 has, but there's a build up towards 4. 5 is pure purple. And then instead of going to pure white, when I did the biggest one, and maybe this is a mistake on my part, but I went to number 6, where I decided to not go to pure white. But anyway, you'll see the big picture thing here is that you need to build a gradient. So this is what we're using for the first gradient. All right, here we go. We're going to work on the cap of a pot of glue. This is just because it's a very big surface. The first thing I'm doing is I'm covering the full thing with black. Now, the surface here is not super nice. So the gemstone is not going to be perfectly looking, but the important thing here is not the actual result of this specific gemstone, is the process building to it. Now, I'm doing this as a voiceover, so there are parts of the videos which are probably going to be put on fast forward, because the video contains a whole bunch of stuff, including the dry time, as is the case right here. Now, there's a couple of reasons why I decided to let the dry time in there. So relatively often in the video, I'm using glazing technique to help with the blend. Now, to see glazes dry is actually really interesting, and when we get there I'm going to tell you what to look at. So right now we are going to do almost a full coverage, but not quite full. Like I'm letting about a third of the cap and this is a mix of black and purple. So if you remember the original picture that we were looking at, this would be color number 1. I'm waiting for this to dry. Now this was not a glaze, so at the moment it is dry and you can see a very clear black demarcation line in between the color and the original black color. On a very large surface, this is not fun to look at. However, when you're painting very small gemstones, these actually are very hard to see. So right now we're going for a coverage with color number 2, which was basically some black and a little bit more purple. Now we're going to see some demarcation still in there, but this is not a problem. We're just laying down our color here, and we're going to basically do the color gradient later. Alright, so this is dry. There's some demarcation, although the color jump is not as big, so the demarcation is much smaller. Now we're going to color 3, and with color 3, we're keeping much closer to the edge. And we're letting dry a little bit. Now, because of the dry time, it is okay to go back in the areas that you've painted previously to work on the blend. So this is me back on color 1 to help with blending both. And I'm adding a lot of water to the color that was on number 1 so that I can glaze the transition in there. Now glazing, I'm going to do future videos on there. Oh, actually right now I'm on the mix in between color 1 and color 2, and I'm glazing it in. Now I'm going to do a full video on glaze at a later point. I just wanted to do one that you guys had actually asked for before. Now when working on blends, you've got many possibilities, and at the moment what I'm doing now is I'm working on color 2 and 3 to make the blend better in there. So basically it's the same paint that I've added a lot of water to it, so there's a lot less pigment in what I'm putting on there, which basically when it dries allows to get the effect that the color has been blended one to another. And you're going to see me do this a lot in this video because the gemstone that we're currently trying to paint is actually pretty large. And now I'm going back to work on the blend between the black color and the number 1. Now, as I said, the basic surface that we're working on right now is not smooth. So don't expect the color, the paint itself to be smooth, as the surface is not smooth. The reason why I'm using the tip of that paint cover is just because it's a much larger surface and it allows me to show the actual effect instead of just slapping 3 dots of paint on a small gemstone. Okay, so now we are on color 4, and basically there's a lot of purple and barely any black in there. And this color at the moment is much diluted. And I'd like to bring your attention to how this is going to dry. At the moment it's almost dry, but if you rewind the video just a little bit, you're going to see when I was putting it on there, the color appeared to be very contrasty, and as the color dries, the color slowly blends into the previous color. And this is why we're using glazing. It's because it allows us to control that thing. I'm going back to the previous steps and I'm working on the blending of the colors in the previous steps, but at this point I'm going to not highlight these facts anymore because I'm going to take for granted that you've understood what I'm doing. So I'm going to go back and forth between the brighter part of the gemstone and the darker part of the gemstone, because I cannot work on the brighter at the same basically I cannot go over and over on the brighter as long as it's not dry. So this is another glaze of color number 4. And don't overwork it. You just put the color on there and then you let it dry. And look at that dry. This is actually really interesting to see dry. I'm going to let that there so that you can see it dry. So you can really see as glaze dry, you see the blend into what it is that they are with the colors around them. So I'm going back to color number 3. And I'm helping this blend a little bit. Now color number 3 at the moment is obviously a glaze, and this too will dry and will help in mixing both colors. And you're just going over and over the various blends, moving from the colors that you've used, and you're thinning these colors down, and you're just working on those lines and trying to get them to blend one with another. It's a lot of back and forth. There's no exact science there. Basically, you do it, oh, suddenly you went a little bit too much, so you come back with another color and you just move as you go. Okay, so now the color I'm using is number 5, and I'm trying to stay much closer to the edge as I can. And this is a glaze, and once again I'm going to show this while it's drying, and you can see the color transforming under your eyes, because when the color is wet it appears very contrasty. The lines will appear very sharp, but as it dries the lines starts disappearing and everything starts getting blurry and getting one color with another. So this is actually really interesting to look at. Keep that in mind. If you're working with paint that is diluted enough, your lines, even though when you're putting the brush on the surface it looks really harsh, if your paint is diluted enough, the lines will get blurry. Another pass of color 4. This is just to make it stronger so that we have more contrast. And this is again a glaze. Another glaze of number 5 again. We're just building up that contrast. And look at the color dry. This is actually really interesting. So as you can see, because the surface is big, we actually need to work on these blends a lot more. If the surface was a lot smaller, the blends would actually be a lot easier to do because the eye would just believe in it, even though the lines would be harsh. another glaze of number 5. Again, just to build up the contrast. And we let dry. Okay, so now I'm switching to a much smaller brush. We're going for the highlights in there. So in this case, I decided to go for a line. This is a mix of white and purple, so this is number 6. I decided to go with a line instead of a dot because I've been experimenting with that. However, this specific one would have probably been better served using a dot instead of a line. So I went for a line in the purple part and in the black part. You're going to mostly see this effect using dots, however. And when we move on to the small bead, I done a dot instead of a line. So if you try to do a line, you're trying for a very small, very thin line in the color. So both the dark part and the brighter part are going to do, we're going to do same type of similar lines. Now going over again, trying to bring some contrast to that line. And if you're not too happy with the shape of your lines, just don't worry, because you can come back afterwards. This is actually what's going to happen here with the line in the darker part. So basically paint did not flow correctly from the brush, and I'm not too happy with how the line there happened. Don't find it's pretty, so we're going to fix it by going back to number 1 color. We're going to glaze number 1 on top of that line, and we're just going to erase the line and let dry for a moment. It is important to keep that blend working. Now the fun thing is, if you look at the darker part right now, the glaze is dry and it's transparent. So I went in back on the white line to bring some contrast on the lighter side, and I did a small mistake there. You see the line is not quite correct. There's a small dot that is not quite nice. So these can be fixed by going back to the previous colors. So in this case, this is number 5 color, and you just glaze it in and you fix the line that you do not like. White part needs to be glazed again in order to erase it, and we're going to let dry. There's a lot of back and forth involved. As soon as you're glazing, unless you're an absolute genius, it's all back and forth in between the colors, and at some point you're happy with the blend that you're seeing. Alright, and now for attempt number 2, on the line on the darker part. And here we go. That's it. So just like that, we have a gemstone effect. Now arguably the black or the darker part actually extends pretty deep in there. I could have made this a little bit more bright purple in the middle. What I'm doing at the moment is that I'm doing very small dots of ivory in the middle of the lines that I've previously done to raise the contrast. So there could have been a little bit more purple towards the middle, but this is the general effect that we're trying to go for. So we're going to move on to a much smaller gemstone. So smaller beads are just the exact same thing as the big ones. So the small gemstones, you do the same thing. However, there's an important difference. When you're working with something that's much smaller, the place you have for gradients are a lot smaller as well. So basically you're going to work with colors that are contrasting one another a lot more. And since the piece you're painting is so small, you don't need to work on a perfect gradient. So in this case, we went from the color 1, which is pure black, to the color 2, which was previously number 4, right? So it was rather early in the mix, and then from 2 we go to 3, which is pure purple, and instead of going from a mix of purple and ivory, we're going to pure ivory. All right, let's do this. All right, so for the small beads, the very first step that we're going to do is that we're going to use a small brush and covering the actual gemstones with black. Now on this typhus model, there are 2 gemstones located right beside the head of the model. So I'm covering this with black at the moment, and it is extremely important to be careful there, because most of the time you are doing this towards the end of a model, so most of it is painted and you do not want to put your black on everything there, just the beads. So be careful. It is nothing is ever impossible to fix, but use a small brush and be careful. So once this is going to be dry, because it is utterly important that you wait for the black to be dry if you want to get this to work properly. But once it's dry, we're going to switch over to a mix of purple and black, but with a strong purple dominant color. So we're waiting for this to dry. Now I'm switching to 00 monument brush. This is because these are so small that before I'm going to the next color, I need to make sure that I'm going to be precise. So this is mostly purple with a little bit of black. Now the good thing about small gemstones like that is that you can get away with a much higher contrast in between the color shift, and you can get away with a color transition that is not perfect. Because it is so small, you don't see most of the details anymore anyway. So what you're looking for is to generate the effect of a gemstone. You don't actually have to do the full perfect transition. So we're going to do that color there. I actually did 2 coats of it because I thought the first one did not provide me with the coverage that I wanted. So I'm letting the first one dry there, and I'm going to go back with a second coat once it's dry. So that is the second coat. it's important to just do the bottom of the gemstone. So the first color, we did about a 50% coverage, maybe a little bit more. And now as we're moving towards lighter color, we're moving down on the gemstone. So we're coming in now with mostly purple. So it's going to be pure purple once this is dry. And for the pure purple, we're going to try to cover maybe like the last fourth or third at the bottom of the gemstone. And that progression is important. You can get away with very high contrast on these small gemstones, but you do need some progression though. As you can see, it already starts looking like gemstones, but it's not quite there yet. We're going to add a little bit more details to this thing. So I'm allowing this to dry, and I will be using a much smaller brush once again. So the next step is that we're going to be doing small white dots. For this, I'm going to use Monument 10 zeros. So for each gemstone, we're going to do 2 white dots, one at the top of the gemstone and one at the bottom of the gemstone. And this is what is going to sell the effect of the gemstone. As you can see, it looks pretty much like what we're trying to achieve right now. That small dot is actually really important because it is light reflecting inside of what we are painting. If you don't do it, it's going to look good, but it's going to look off. If you do it, it's not only going to look good, it's going to look natural. All right, so that actually is the end of the gemstone on this. Now I'm going to pursue a little bit. I did a little boo-boo on the left side there. I went over with one of the base color a little bit, so I'm going back and I'm doing the shading right under the gemstone with a little bit of black. But if you didn't screw up, you don't need to do this. So this is going to take a second. I'm going to show the final result in a moment. And here we go. With that, the gemstone effect is done. I hope that you learned some cool things. If you have any questions, feel free to leave any comment down below, and thank you for watching.